Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6, Facilitating Discussions. That's a big thing that a lot of us are doing these days, and so we're excited to have teacher extraordinaire Leah Dunbar going to be in here to help us to kind of get some cool ideas, and she's coming with a ton of templates and stuff, like takeaways for you. So we're pretty psyched to have her here. Thank you so much, Leah, for coming.
Yeah, and just a reminder, our website is up and running, so you can access all of our prior episodes. And we have our clinic times on Thursdays from 3 to 4, which is a time for you to drop in and just get one-on-one support with all of your distance learning needs.
Perfect. All right. So what makes a discussion successful? And there's nothing here from any kind of scholarly work. My wife and I, who do this kind of work all the time, we just were like, yeah, what does make discussions go well? So we kind of went over this list. So Cassidy and Leah, please punch holes in these ideas. But we were thinking clarity is super important when you're doing a discussion. And what kind of really be thoughtful about the structures you provide your students so that they know what the task is and they know what they're supposed to do and what they're supposed to talk about. So they don't go into a room and go like, what are we supposed to do? I don't get it. And then safety, really big. You know, a lot of people, especially right now with whatever's in the background for them or their brothers and sisters running around, how do we build safety so that they feel like they can talk and they can share what they want to share? Smaller groups help with that, but if they're in a space that they don't feel like their voice is important, then they probably won't share. So how do you build that community? Motivation. Why? Why should they do it? Because watching YouTube card tricks is way more interesting for the most part than talking about. Oh, does that hit close to home, Cassidy?
Shout out to my 6th grader right there. Thanks for that, Dustin.
Oh yeah, you bet. So we have to have some reason, whether it's grades or whether it's just a really important topic to them. Grades are probably the worst motivation possible, but it's real. But also trying to get a task that's interesting to them. And then ease. Ease of use in the sense of what device do they have? Maybe they're on a phone in a car and they're not actually able to do any typing or writing. So how do we make sure that those things work for everybody? Universal design kind of stuff.
That's going to be my mantra, I think, when I'm working with people and when we're talking about whatever technologies we're going to be using to make our lesson engaging. Can you do this task on a phone in a car? Because even the reality is, even if your district has provided Chromebooks or iPads for all students, you know that you still have students who are sitting in a parking lot somewhere getting Wi-Fi and accessing your class on a phone. And so that's a particularly important consideration as you're planning your lessons. Can this be done on a phone in a car?
That's awesome. What do you think, Leah? How did I do?
You did great. And I'm really reflecting on that last point, the ease of use. And can you do this task on a phone in a car? Because I think the biggest challenge right now for teachers is making that shift from what we're used to using. Our tools have been paper and pencil, and we're in person, and we can support students in what they need to get the task done. And we really can't do that, in CDL in the ways that we're used to. So I really appreciate that last bullet point, Dustin. And then so thank you. And I was just thinking, of course, this is such a great list because you were in discussion with your wife and you're utilizing all of these key points, as you're brainstorming together. And that's what we want students to be able to do, right?
Yeah. So let's get some good disclosure here. Cassidy actually helped to then change some of the wording, so hers was the phone in the car thing. So I want to make sure I give that to her. Nice. And really, most of this was my wife anyway. So like typical male, I took full credit for everything when really most of it wasn't my idea.
We'll we have to teach our students that intellectual humility. That's like the theme of the year for me.
Yep. Yeah, but Dustin, if a fly comes and lands on your head in the middle of this podcast, Leah and I are out. We're out.
Done. Fair enough. And on that note,
all right. So let's go back to the distance learning playbook, because that tends to be my job in these episodes, right? So one of the things that I really like and appreciate about the distance learning playbook is this notion that as educators entering CDL, you have your expertise, right? You know how to teach, you know how to facilitate a discussion, and there are some like tried and true things that you've done in the past that you can still do in CDL. And I would say, you know, with those breakout rooms, once you get in a habit of doing that, it's going to get super easy and super smooth for you. So if that has felt clunky to you so far, keep at it, because you will get really good at giving students a task, right? So for the next 2 minutes, I want you to jot down your ideas about blah, 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 and then you're over there putting them into their breakout groups. Things like think, pair, share, turn and talk, give one, get one. Jigsaw, I'm not going to lie, Jigsaw is going to be a little more complicated. We'll probably follow up on that later with another episode. But I think if you think about the tried and true ways that you have facilitated discussion in the past, some of them will apply to how you're teaching now in CDL, but they're going to take different considerations. So getting really good and really comfortable about putting students into those breakout rooms as groups is something everybody should be practicing right now. It's good, and those breakout rooms are our best friends.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's true. All right. So
Leah, we brought you on here as our special guest to talk about facilitating discussions. What about, like, why should we listen to you? What expertise do you have or experience do you have in facilitating discussions that's going to lend itself to our conversation for teachers today?
Okay, well, just thank you for inviting me on here today. And my name's Leah Dunbar, and I teach a class called Courageous Conversations. And so this is a class that is ethnic studies content, but is inquiry-based. And so I've been puzzling over how to transfer my course into CDL, you know, since last March, and how do we capitalize on students' like innate curiosity about one another and their need to talk about themselves, and all, you know, and so with the purpose of the class is for students to develop their capacity to listen to other perspectives as they are at the same time learning, you know, the content, which is ethnic studies. And so I've been working on this puzzle all summer, and I'm not going to say that I have arrived, because I certainly have not. But I am. I mean, I have not arrived, but I am thinking every moment, and my students are providing me feedback almost at every moment about what's working and what's not working when we're working to build an online discussion-based classroom together. And so that's what we're working on. And so, you know, we're at the end of week 3. So I've experimented with some things, and I'm going to continue to experiment with some apps. But I'm going to share just a couple that I've used so far. And again, my guiding principle with CDL is students need community right now. That's the most important thing we can do with the time that we have together. And, you know, I can create videos and share content in other spaces when we're not together. But when we're together, it's time for us to get to know each other, develop the protocols that will enable productive discussion. And so that's what we're working on right now. We've started with, you know, establishing low stakes prompts. I learned some of this from the distance learning playbook. So I want to give a shout out for having those strategies modeled to me about, you know, welcoming students into the classroom, having them, you know, mentioning their name as I'm reading their comments in the chat as they're coming forward. Also utilizing the chat to be responsive. My classes are classes of 40. I have 2 classes of 40. And so I have much larger classes for whatever reason than a lot of other people, than I hope other people have. You know, so I definitely, for my own self, have had to be super responsive about the conditions that these students are learning within, because that's a very intimidating classroom environment. You know, in addition to that layer of distance and disengagement that is Zoom. I'm utilizing warm-ups in Canvas and in the Zoom classroom for relationship building. Some of them are content related. Some of them are about just the protocols that we're using and feedback for students on what we've been practicing so far. Some of them are just like the usual, what's on your playlist, so that we can be learning again about one another as we're gathering and people are logging in, and then navigating all the technology. I am developing consistent breakout groups so that students can start to deepen their relationships with one another. I mostly teach seniors, and so a lot of them have background with each other. And then, some students are new to my school right now. And also I want to have some level of predictability for students as they're, popping in and out of these different Zoom classes that they're in. And so again, I'm really focused on cultivating a sense of community and consistency for students who are living in a world where there's just not a lot to be had. And then I'm utilizing a variety of tools in my class so that when students log on, they're not really sure what they're going to find. They know that they're going to come into a very welcoming space, but I'm utilizing a lot of tools because I want there to be that curiosity and intellectual engagement, so that students want to keep coming back to class. And Cassidy and I, we've had these conversations about the bells and whistles a little bit because we are all being marketed to right now, and it's kind of overwhelming, and not all of the tools really achieve what we really want, which is a simple goal, right? Which community we want safe communities for our students. We want a place where they can take some intellectual risks. We want to hear their voices, and I want to create conditions where they feel safe to turn on their camera sometimes, or communicate through other medium if that's not going to work for them. And I want to respect that.
Let's talk about some of these tools that you're using.
I just want to go back to something that you said earlier, Leah, because it really resonated with me. I have a 6th grader, and he said to me yesterday, it's disappointing to be starting 6th grade and not to get to know the students who are coming from other schools. And I just had this moment where I thought, oh, wow, this is true. And what can teachers do to build that community? And I love your idea of those consistent breakout groups, because that would really help him connect with, especially as a 6th grader, connect with his new identity as a middle schooler, and connecting with students from different backgrounds and from a different elementary school. So I just really appreciate that tip.
Well, I have a 6th grade stepdaughter too. And so I was listening to her doing her classes, and I realized that I was hearing the teacher's voice, and every once in a while I would hear a student's voice, and it was like this really kind of heartbreaking attempt for them. Like they're trying to connect, but there's so much that the teacher is feeling like they need to deliver, particularly right now as they use the tools that are going to enable the learning, that I was like, oh my gosh, these kids are trying to get to know each other, but the only voice we're hearing is the teachers, and that's not going to work. And so what I'm trying to do is create as many routines that facilitate students guiding the discussion. From our warm-ups, I have a What's on Your Feed warm-up where students start the first A-Day of the week bringing their current events, news item, and they only have to do it once throughout the trimester, but we're up and rolling with that. And that was really beautiful. We just had our first What's on Your Feed last Monday, and then they're bringing in the topics that are dominating their news feed. There's a media literacy piece of that, analysis piece of that, of course, but it's also centering their voices in our entry point into our class together. I've been using Poll Everywhere so that, as we are brainstorming topics or students are offering their feedback about, like, our topic this week was the social construction of race and racism. And so students were sharing how important it was, the ways that they identify racially and ethnically. And so that's then another way for them to know who's in the room and who's not in the room, right? And so we're having discussion in some other ways that maybe feel safer for students, but they also are getting to see other students' feedback. So we've used Poll Everywhere almost every week so far, at least once a week. I'm utilizing the chat as an alternative to verbal participation in the big group. I found that for me personally, the chat is very liberating because I am not that comfortable sometimes in big groups, of people, particularly if I don't know them very well, but I do like to add my 2 cents. And so I always want to make that chat available for students. And I've heard some suggestion that that's not a great idea. I think it is a great idea. I think it's our best friend right now is the chat. And I do have the private chat disabled between students. So that's just, a personal preference. And that's how I'm approaching that.
How do you manage that though during class? And you got 40 students. I can imagine you got tons of questions coming in.
I do, and I have students help me out with that, and I invite that support because, of course, I have 2 screens going on and, learning how to use the Zoom features and have the chat going. And I have to also manage the participants, right, who are coming in so we don't get Zoom bombed. And I was, hoping to use a student to help me with that. And then I realized that actually won't work until students really know one another's names. And I'm just not sure about the safety of that one. And so I'm managing that as well. And so I've asked students to help me with the chat and, the raise hand feature. If I'm missing something, I'm relying on you all to help me out and support me.
That's great.
Yeah. And empowerment. That's awesome.
I mean, and just in the class that I teach, it's really important that students are empowered to lead the class. It's their class. It's Courageous Conversations. And because of the way that Zoom operates, I think it's just really important that students are feeling like it's their space and that they are participating, because it's super easy to just turn on your Zoom and walk out of the room. And I'm not going to say that some of my students aren't doing that, but I'm trying to create as many different ways to facilitate engagement so that they know that if they are doing that, we're probably going to know. And then I can follow up with them later about what's going on in their home or in their lives, and how can I support them in being present as much as possible. So I've created smaller discussion day groups because, like I said, my groups are classes of 40. And so I've broken them up into 4 smaller groups of 20 that run in 40-minute increments on my second class day of the week. And student feedback has been really positive about that.
You shortened the class time for that group of 20, but you're going to get more interaction with each individual student.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly. So I've embedded, part of the expectation is they use that other 40 minutes for asynchronous work. And they know that, and I know that, and we've agreed to that. But they're saying, I feel so much more comfortable sharing and speaking up because I'm in the smaller discussion group. And that's also a consistent grouping. There's a trick to the Zoom links because they have a little bit more to navigate. But I think as we continue with these routines, it's going to be a little bit easier every week for them to know what the expectation is, which does lead into that next point, which is, I'm trying as much as I can, because so much has been new with my students in CDL, to create templates for how class is going to go, both in the big class and then the small class, with certain routines that develop students' questioning techniques so that we get really insightful, rich questions that they're then using to guide those discussions.
So Leah, it sounds like quite a bit of your asynchronous work is them preparing for discussions during the synchronous times.
Yes. Yeah. And because my classes, I teach, a class that's articulated with a College Now class. And so a big part of the content is documentary. And so it's, I can't lose that piece of the class, because that's part of what makes it, I think, engaging and adds those other perspectives that I can't personally offer from my own experience. And so that's another layer to that, is it's a way for them to engage critically with that material and then come into the class with their questions, and they're just a way for them to engage with other students, like what came up for you. And so they're the ones talking. Like, all of this is really about getting students to be the ones asking the questions, answering the questions, and then leaving and reflecting on, like, how has my, my perspective been expanded by listening to the voices of these other people in the room, the Zoom room. And what the other thing I'm trying to do is make sure that I can utilize the discussion boards in Canvas so that we can actually have discussion, not, asynchronously, I guess is the word of the year, but and letting them know that that's okay too, that is an important, other space that allows them to do some more reflective thinking. There's more wait time, there's more opportunity for them to revise rather than their kind of first thinking that we often use when we're in person with each other having a discussion.
That's super cool. And I'm still stuck on the breaking the big group into a smaller group and having maybe half the class time, but a more intensive one. Because it, like, for poll everywhere, it's only free up to 25 participants. So you couldn't use it with your 40-person class, but you can with the 20-person class.
Exactly. And of course, I did buy the membership because of anticipating this challenge for me all year, which, not everybody has to do, which is good. So hopefully I'll be reimbursed for that.
Fingers crossed, right? Let's see.
Yeah.
So you have a couple tools here, right?
Yeah, we've got some tools to look at. Hey, Leah, before you show us tools, I'm just curious, would you consider yourself to be a pretty tech-savvy person embarking on all of this prior to CDL?
No. Absolutely not. That is a very good question. And I know, like most teachers out there, we've been spending hours upon hours upon hours to gain those skills that enable our online classes to be as rich and not just productive. I want students to feel like they've learned. I don't want their time to be wasted. Their time is precious. And, so I have been spending a lot of time trying to learn this medium so that I can serve my students. And that's been exhausting, but it's also been a big creative challenge for me to think about how do I adapt what has worked for me into this new realm. And so I've used the mirror window analysis, forever in my teaching of literature, any content, right? It's just a perspective taking exercise, and students start to recognize the language, What's a mirror for you? Where do you see yourself? What's a window? What's a perspective you don't share? You may even find it objectionable, right? But let's practice sitting with each other's ideas and listening to understand rather than, debate. Because we don't have, I think, the strong relationships that maybe we're used to having that help us kind of navigate some of those more contentious discussions. So this is more about practicing just sitting with other perspectives. And I think that's just that, we really need those skills right now. And so I use the mirror window analysis. I built that into my question and discussion template form. And so you can see that there with that link. And I had students create an assignment in Padlet where they're sharing, a personal narrative around their own experience. And then they're reading the offerings of other students and then reflecting and recording what's a mirror for me, what's a window. And then I've included those other two discussion writing templates that I've adapted, of course, from some other brilliant teacher using, a Socratic seminar type discussion protocol. So my next task with Dustin's help, I hope, is, creating a Socratic seminar type experience where students actually can kind of see when they're up, and anticipate that, and teachers can communicate with them about them, what the expectation is, and some nice little like kind of pushing them to step into the discussion and then step out of the discussion. So I'm still working this puzzle out, and every week is a new just attempt, right, to facilitate my students' voices in the class. And I'm sure that they're going to continue to guide me in what's working and what's not working. And fortunately, I have my niece in my class, and she is very honest with me with what doesn't work. And so I recommend, if you can, have a family member take your class, because they will let you know.
How are you getting feedback from students? What's your process for that?
I'm using the warm-ups, including the warm-up in Canvas. So it can be written, or it can be them sharing in the chat. And then, also just like a continuous invitation. One of the things that I like about Canvas, and I know not everybody's using Canvas, is that I have the app on my phone, and I receive their messages as they write them. And that's the thing, is I think because of CDL, we're just used to our interactions happening in real time, right, with students. And that's just not the way our lives are right now. And yet we still have to support students as immediately as we can. And so I'm using the Canvas, message feature, almost as a texting, type thing, because I want to give students information as immediately as I can, because we're just not together enough. So
yeah. That's a good point.
Well,
thanks so much
for work with you on building that new tool. That's going to be fun.
Yes.
And thanks for sharing these tools, because anybody who watches the podcast knows you can go into the slideshow afterwards and you can click on those links and you have access to some resources. So I think you also brought up a really good point, which is that sometimes, we look at a tool online and we're like, oh, this is awesome, but it's kind of overwhelming. And I'm not sure that a kid on a phone in a car could do this. That'd be a great thing to talk through with somebody like Dustin, right? So how can we pull ideas from this and simplify it in a way that's going to make it more accessible to students?
Right. And and again, to return to like some of the other feedback mechanisms, because I have, my niece in my class, like she gave me some feedback back on an activity I did using Jamboard, that, was really helpful in the way that I then utilized another, app or whatever you call it. I'm not tech savvy, but another way for me to try to gather student voice that is not just, live. So. Yeah.
Well, Leah, you are definitely a lot more tech savvy than you were in March.
Yes, I am.
And I think, if people out there are kind of struggling with that, like, oh, I'm not tech savvy. I mean, we're all learning, right? And that's a good reminder to us of what our students are experieing every day. And sadly, we are just about out of time. But Leah, it's been so fun having you here. And I know we didn't get through all of our slides. So if people want to access the slideshow, you'll see, I think, a couple of examples.
This is okay. I just got to share this one thing.
You want to do it real quick? Okay.
It's just super cool. So I was running a training, and I use this mood meter thing, and I use Poll Anywhere to have the participants tell me where they're at. They're actually moving from Google Classroom to Canvas, and so I'm like, how are you feeling about this, right? So one person's way off the scale on the unpleasant side, right? And so, and then I talked to them about Canvas and how it works and what it can do and what it can't do and all that. And then I did kind of a formative assessment afterwards and said, how are you feeling now? And as a teacher, I mean, I can just see that shift over, they're not not excited for sure, but we're shifting over, we're moving. And so I was thinking, for any subject, like math in particular, like how are you feeling about the homework last night? How are you feeling about this concept now? So yeah,
Cool.
it's pretty cool stuff.
I love it. Cool.
And we do not have stock yet and pull everywhere, just so people know. But I might be calling my person as soon as we get off this call.
Yeah, and if you want to come and you want to learn how to do a poll, drop into one of our clinics on Thursday because we'd be happy to help you with that.
Thursday at 3. Yeah. All right. Take care, everybody. So good. Thank you again,
Leah.
Leah. So awesome to hear all your wisdom.
Fun.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. All right.
Bye.
See you all next time.